As a professional bike tester, there's currently only one e-bike on the market that I would buy with my own money. And it's this one, the 6,000-pound Amflow PL Carbon. Is it perfect? Far from it. But by the end of this review, you'll know everything that I love and hate about the Amflow. And if you've already got one, I got a workaround for you that makes it even better. And we've got a lot to get through, so the plan is to split the test into 5 distinct parts, even though I'll probably bounce around a little bit. So let's get straight into it. And we're going to start with frame and geometry. So Amflow offer the PL Carbon in 4 frame sizes, medium to XXL. That's right, there's no size small. And the reason for that is it's got an 800 watt-hour battery that pretty much takes up the full length of the down tube, so they couldn't actually make the bike much shorter. And if we take a look at the suspension layout, it would probably be really difficult for them to get this low enough to make it a genuine size small. And even on this size L, the seat tube height's 455mm, which is pretty tall for a modern trail bike. But by far my biggest bugbear with the Amflow frame is that the bottom bracket is simply too high. At 341mm, it's simply too high for a 150mm travel bike, and that's exactly why I fitted a 27.5-inch rear wheel to the full 29er Amflow. The smaller rear wheel drops the BB height down to 327mm, which is just 2mm lower than the white E-Lite 150 I tested 2 months ago. And with short 155mm crank arms, you don't need to really worry about pedal clearance. The other big change that the smaller rear wheel makes is that it takes the head angle from 64 degrees down to 63, and I've got no complaints about that. So other than the BB height, I'm really happy with the geometry on the Amflow. It's got a 470mm reach on the size large, which is perfect for me at like 5'11", and the 445mm chainstay, it's not crazy short. It loads the front tire really well on like flat turns, but it still also keeps the front end down when you're going up those crazy steep climbs, which is exactly what you're gonna do with all of that power from the motor. Dang, I almost forgot about the weight. Okay, stock in full 29er build with the stock tires, this bike comes in at around 21.5 kilos. In this form, with the DH tire on the front and an Enduro tire on the rear, but with the 27.5 wheel, it's actually lighter. It's 21.3 kilos, which is pretty good for a full power bike. And I think we all need to remember, this is their very first bike, so it's pretty close. Let's start with some numbers. The Amflow's got 160mm travel fork and it's got 150mm travel in the rear. And I know it's got 150mm travel in the rear because I actually measured the travel and it came out at 148mm vertical. So if you measured along the arc, you'll definitely get 150mm out of this bike. We've got the basic Fox 36 performance up front with the grip damper. And while it doesn't have the adjustment and maybe the support you get with like the more expensive Fox fork, it is super sensitive and super plush. And while the fork was pretty easy to set up, the rear shock is a bit of a curveball. Now it's a trunnion mounted shock with a 55mm stroke, and I've tested enough SLE bikes with 55mm stroke shocks to know that 200 PSI is a good starting point for me, but on the Amflow, it was way too high. So basically the first time I rode it, the bike was riding too high and felt way too harsh, so I rode the same track I think 11 times, dropping the shock pressure down by 5 PSI each time, and I went all the way down to 160 PSI, which was way too soft, but interestingly, it's Amflow's recommended pressure for my weight. In the end, I settled on 175 PSI because that's kind of like, it was firm enough to keep me off the bump stop, and also it allowed the bike to ride low enough to kill off some of that BB height. Obviously, if you switch to a 27.5-inch rear wheel like I have, you don't need to run the shocks so soft to kill off the kind of BB height. So yeah, definitely play with the shock pressures on this bike and do not go with the recommended pressures from Amflow. Now, with the softer rear suspension setup, I felt very much like the Amflow felt like an enduro bike. So I was a little bit confused as to why a lot of other testers have been saying it feels like a trail bike, because this bike felt pretty planted, really capable. On high-speed trails in Italy, I could go as fast as any enduro bike I've tested there. So it got me thinking, could it be the shock tune on the more expensive bike that most of the other people have tested that's making a big difference? So I got Amflow to send me the Float X of the expensive Pro model. Now, you're probably thinking this fancy Fox Float X Kashima coated shock should be plusher than the basic float that comes on the bike. It isn't. This shock has got like a platform in it, a more pronounced platform in it, which actually robs the bike of traction, sensitivity, and you get more vibration through the bike, and it definitely makes it feel more like a trail bike, whereas this bike feels more like an enduro bike. So if you bought the Pro version and want your bike to be more capable, you probably bought the wrong bike. So I can't stress enough that the entry-level Amflow PL Carbon is so much more than a trail bike. So that's all pretty standard EMTB stuff so far. But what really sets this bike apart is the Avinox motor from DJI. It's compact, it's relatively light at 2.5 kilos, and it's got tons of power. Now, you don't need me to tell you that it's got 850 watts peak power, but to put that in perspective, most bikes have about 650 watts peak power. So it's almost like having the power of an SL bike on top of a full powered bike, but still in an SL-ish package. In turbo mode, the bike's kicking out 105 Newton meters of torque. And if you stick it in boost, it goes to 120 Newton meters of torque and gives you a full 1000 watts peak power for 30 seconds. And to be fair, it's kind of a gimmick feature that you kind of give your friends a go on your bike and they try it and they go, oh my God, it feels amazing, but I've never really used it much while riding. I pretty much stay in either turbo or in auto mode. And the difference between turbo and auto is really interesting because turbo gives you that really light pedaling, easy going, one-handed climbing, talking back to your friends like this because they're so far behind you. If you stick it in auto mode, it feels more like people like to call it natural. Basically means you have to work harder, right? But what's really interesting with it is that how smooth it is in auto mode. If you pedal light, you have to pedal hard to get like the power of the bike. But as soon as you put the effort in, the power just woof, it just comes through and it delivers it. And there's something that's really unique about the Amflow that a lot of people aren't talking about, and that's the speed sensor at the back. This sensor here, it's called a Hall sensor, and I'm convinced this is the secret to Amflow's like smooth power delivery. It's got 42 pickup points, so it's measuring your speed 42 times for every revolution of the wheel, whereas most systems do it once. That means that most bikes travel almost, well, a full 29er is going to travel almost 2.5 meters before it takes another speed reading, whereas this one will have done it 42 times in the same distance. And I was so impressed by the power delivery of the Amflow on steep techie climbs that I actually asked them if this thing has traction control. They said it didn't, but if you look at this sensor, it's almost identical to what you get on ABS brakes. So I think Amflow has the potential to put traction control on this bike, and with so much power, it's exactly what you need for doing those steep, crazy climbs. But the DJI ecosystem isn't just about raw power. Like, the integration is unbelievable. And this may seem trivial, but this is one of my favorite features that I'm going to show you. So this is the charging port where you connect the cable. And when you pull the cable out, the port closes automatically. So you don't have to remember to do it. So you can't ride around in the mud with your charging port open the whole time, all getting caked in crap. If you're really into your e-bike tech, you've got not one, but two wireless controllers for controlling the screen and for controlling the power modes. But because the 2-inch screen's also a touch screen, you could remove these completely and just run it all from here. Auto, Eco, Trail, Turbo. Then you can scroll between the screens like this. And I've been using this with gloves on and it works pretty good. And it's got a really interesting feature. It knows what gear you're in. So even though you're running a SRAM mechanical drivetrain that is not connected to the system in any way, shape, or form other than through the front chainring, this bike, the minute you change gear, it knows what gear you're in. And I think that comes back again to the speed sensor and all of the electronics in the bike. They're so sensitive that they can just figure it out like that. The other thing I love about this setup is that when you plug the charger in, it tells you how long the bike is going to take for it to get a full charge. And it comes with a fast charger as standard, which just looks like a regular charger, but it'll basically go from 0 to 75% in an hour and a half. Now, those are all pretty standard features that you've probably heard about elsewhere. But what I haven't really heard anyone else talking about is the fact that the motor seems to have quite a lot of drag in it, in the system. I don't know if it's seal drag or even the cogs inside the motor themselves, but when you just turn, it feels kind of light-ish when you're turning it like this, but when I try to pull it backwards, there's quite a lot of resistance to get it to do it. Now, if you compare that to the new Bosch CX system, the chain pulls back like freestyle almost with just like an analog bike. So there's efficiency gains that I think DJI could make with this motor, or maybe they wanted to be extra safe that they didn't want to get water in there, so it's like super tightly sealed. Either way, with the 800 watt-hour battery and my Continental control tires that I use for range testing, I managed to get 1,430 meters of vertical out of this bike, which is pretty decent given the fact it's pumping out 850 watts of peak power. I mean, there's so much more stuff I could talk about the electronics. I mean, I haven't got my phone out, we haven't talked about the app, all the things you can do in the app, but this review would go on forever if I covered everything. So let's move straight on to the components. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when I saw that the Amflow came with Magura MT5 brakes, I was terrified because I had a pretty bad experience on the Cannondale Moterra SL that we tested last time with MT5 brakes, because it had this kind of breakaway lever function that kind of flies out and went out from underneath my finger. And also we had just issues with the pads, contamination, just non-stop issues with the brakes. I gotta say, I've been blown away by the MT5s on the Amflow. They've been 100% consistent, they're super powerful, and with these different levers that I can't remember the name of, which I'm gonna have to go and look at my computer. With these HC levers that don't push all the way out, the braking performance has been unbelievable. It's super consistent, no issues, and you can't say that about a lot of brakes these days, right? The setup on the brakes isn't perfect though. Actually, that's not true. The setup for the shifter on the brakes isn't quite perfect though, because it's got this kind of integrated clamp. And if you run your brake levers quite flat, like I do, basically the shifter pod is too far underneath the grip to make it easy to get to. So I'd swap that out for an independent shifter mount, and then I can put it wherever I wanted. And while we're talking about the shifting performance, the SRAM GX mechanical drivetrain hasn't missed a beat. The bike comes with an NX cassette, so it's 1150. And to be honest, when I first got the Amflow, I was like, I'm never gonna need the 50-tooth cog. I've got so much power. And I've actually seen some people online removing the biggest cog. But when I did the range test on this bike and it dropped into eco mode with 9% of the battery left to go, I was pretty happy to have a 50-tooth cog. And in fact, I'd have probably preferred a 52. So this is actually the original 29er rear wheel of the bike. And this is the cassette. And you can see here that like the wear on the cassette is definitely down in the lower cog, so I haven't spent very much time up here, but someone in the comments picked up on the fact that it's got quite a slow 21-point engagement, and that's true, it is. It rotates quite a lot before it catches, but because the bike's got a lot of overrun on the motor, the chain keeps the cassette tight, so if you kind of like stop pedaling for a split second then start pedaling again, there's no lag, the power delivery is instantaneous. I also like what the Amflow is, when you're sitting on the bike and you put your foot on the pedal, it doesn't have that jittery feel that it wants to go. It knows you're only resting your foot on the pedal, you're not actually pedaling. I should also point out that Amflow's own brand aluminium wheels have been bomber solid. When I was running the full 29er setup in Italy, I rode some crazy rocky tracks at high speeds and I dinged the rims several times and I haven't damaged them or needed to true them. But the stock tires, they had to go. In fact, I've never even ridden them. The bike comes with the assegai on the front in a thin EXO casing, and it comes with a dissector on the rear in a slightly thicker EXO Plus casing. But given the power of this bike and how capable it is, you want either downhill or enduro tires on it as standard, trust me. Oh, I almost forgot. There are a couple of other little things about the spec I want to point out. The entry-level bike comes with a 30mm rise bar, and if you notice, I'm running the stem at full height. That's another advantage of having the lower BB height with the smaller rear wheel, is that all of a sudden the cockpit feels in the right place, even at max height. And I've heard people complain on the Pro model that the front end's too low. Front end's not too low on my bike. And the other thing is the Sella Royale saddle. It's comfortable when you're seated and it's a good shape, but its profile means that it catches on the inside of your thighs when you're riding like bike parking trails and jump trails, and it's quite firm on the edges. So I'd like to see it either a little bit softer on the edges or just have a slightly narrower profile. Like I said, it's not uncomfortable for seated long rides. It's just when you get really dynamic on the bike, you feel the saddle between your thighs. Actually, this brings us full circle. If the bike had a slightly shorter seat tube and a longer dropper post, the saddle would probably be lower and completely out of the way. But it hasn't, so it's something you might want to consider changing. That covers all of the component parts of the Amflow. But now I want to talk about the performance. And to do that, we need to take a more holistic approach. So let's start with climbing. Now, I think there are two types of e-bike climbers. There's people that want to do technical, steep, crazy climbs, and there's other people that just want to use the bike as an uplift to go up the far road as fast as possible. And the cool thing about the Amflow is it's the best bike for both styles of climbing. So whether you're a self-shuttler like me, or someone who wants to do crazy tech climbs, this is the best e-bike on the market right now. But you can shuttle up a far road on any bike pretty quickly. Where this bike really excels is on crazy steep technical terrain. It's got momentum, it's got pace, and remember, it's got 850 watts of peak power. That's so much more than any other bike in the market. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to see a line, and instead of maybe riding up the gully, I actually wall rode up some rocks on the way up climbs that I actually thought were impossible. I mean, it's insane. And if anyone says you don't get fit or you can't have a workout ride in an e-bike, just go and try and do some crazy technical climbs on this bike and you'll be huffing and puffing. And that brings us back to the tires again, because with all that power, if you don't have the grip at the contact patch, you're not getting up any of those crazy steep climbs. So you need the downhill tires, not just for going downhill, you also need them for going up. So if you're anything like me, you're not here for the uphill flow, right? You're here to find out how this bike performs in this sense. And in this setup, actually no, even in the 29er setup with the downhill tires, this bike is an absolute ripper. Is the suspension the best I've ever ridden? No, there's definitely tuning options on this shock and a lot of tuning options on the shock above to make this bike better, but it's pretty darn close. So I've been going to Italy on vacation over Christmas probably for the last 10 years, and I've ridden probably 10, 12, maybe 13 different enduro bikes on those tracks in Italy. And the Amflow is as fast or faster than any of them downhill. So that's what really threw me when people said this bike is a trail bike. It shouldn't be pigeonholed as such because it's so much more capable. And for anyone that thinks, oh, you can't make all these modifications to the bike because you're not testing it as standard, well, that's true, right? But what I want to know is I want to know the full potential of the bike, not just how Amflow deliver it. Which begs the question, does Amflow need to make an enduro bike? Because what are you going to get? What, you're going to get a 10 mil longer travel fork and maybe 10, 15 mil in the rear? Bike's going to get heavier. This bike's already really capable and it can do it all. It's the fastest bike uphill. Is it the fastest bike downhill? No, I think there's probably a little bit of potential to get the rear suspension to work better, but I can hang with anyone else on bikes costing twice the price on this 6,000 pound e-bike. And that's what I want. I want a bike that can do it all and isn't gonna break the bank. So when I said at the beginning of this review that it's the only bike I'd buy with my own money, I wasn't joking. But I have a dilemma. How am I gonna rate this bike? Because it clearly isn't perfect. Is it an 8? Is it a 9? It's really hard for me to say, but I'm gonna give it a 9, and for a specific reason. I can modify the Amflow quite simply to perform as well as any other e-bike I've ridden. But what I can't do is up-spec any other bike I've ridden to give me the power of the Amflow. So that makes it a unique and special bike. Sure, it needs a lower BB, probably needs a shorter seat tube, and it needs better tires as standard. But those are all niggles I can live with. But what I can't live without is the 850 watts peak power. For 6 grand, this bike is simply unbeatable, which is why I gave it a 9 rating. And if you like this review, please support the channel because it's what allows me to make 100% independent bike reviews. Thanks a lot for watching.